Well, hello everyone and welcome to another of our story videos, and this week we're going to be talking about the cochineal beetle, which, as you'll find out, figures quite heavily in the history of Lanzarote and was an industry that made some islanders a lot of money over a period of a couple of hundred years. Now, if you've driven in the north of the island, particularly Guatiza and Mala and on to Orsala, you will have seen fields and fields of prickly pear cactuses. But they weren't being grown just for their pears, although people enjoyed the pears that they produced. They were being grown for a whole other reason. Now, the Spanish discovered both the prickly pear cactus and the cochineal beetle from the Aztecs when they conquered South America. And both were imported to mainland Spain, but more importantly for Lanzarote's story, they were also imported into Lanzarote. And this was because the crushed up cochineal beetles produced a red dye that could be used as both a food colouring and a clothing colouring, which was really hard to create in the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries. And this red dye was highly prized and very valuable. So the people of Lanzarote, having discovered that they could cultivate the beetle on the prickly pear cactuses, grew fields and fields of them and started creating this cochineal dye. And this was in the 1500s, the 1600s and the 1700s. So in the very early days after the conquest of the Canary Islands. And you can see the effect it had on the island. If you look at the grand houses in the north of Lanzarote, you'll see that people did very well financially out of the cochineal beetle. So in today's video, we're going to explain how they were cultivated and why the cultivation of them gradually died down in the 1800s. Now, if you look closely at the cactuses, the prickly pear cactuses I mentioned in the north of the island, you'll often see what looks like a white dust on them. And these are actually the female cochineal beetles that become a parasite for the cactus, and they land on them and they never move. They just stay there for their whole lives. The males, of course, can fly, and they will fly from leaf to leaf, impregnating females who then lay hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of eggs. And this is the sort of white dust you'll see often in circles on the leaves of the prickly pear cactuses. And just before the eggs hatch, the white dust and the females who have laid that white dust are scraped off the leaves, and then they're just left out in the sun to dry out. Because they're no longer able to feed off the leaves, they die and they just dry in the sunshine. And once they're dried, they're crushed, and that's when the red dye is emitted. Now, some of the nymphs, which are the baby cochineal beetles, are left on the leaves, and they produce a sort of waxy string which they use to move on to another plant or another leaf on the same plant, and then the whole process starts all over again. The cycle is 90 days or about 3 months. So a leaf is infected, if you like, with the cochineal beetle. It's then left for about 3 months. They are scraped, leaving some to move on to other leaves using those waxy filaments. And then they're crushed to produce this very valuable red food or clothing dye. Now, the beetles always had to be hand-picked. It's a job that needs to be done by hand. It can't be done by machine. And it takes, believe it or not, 140,000 beetles to make 1 ton of dye. And Lanzarote's biggest customer in the 17th and 18th centuries was Campari. Campari used the dye to make their emblematic red drink. And they chose Lanzarote's particular brand of cochineal because they valued the quality of it, which gave a very consistent colour across their product. And cochineal was used as a red food colouring for hundreds of years because there was no other natural way of achieving a red colour for food. So how did it all die out? Well, in the 18th century, somebody invented or came up with a way of making a red dye without using any natural products. It was basically a synthetic dye that could be created in a laboratory, and therefore the demand slowly fell for the relatively expensive cochineal dye, and the synthetic colouring was used for clothing and food products all over the world and gradually gained traction and overtook cochineal. Now, because of the relatively high labour costs and the intensive cultivation sequence, cochineal farming basically died out in Lanzarote in the middle of the 19th century, so the middle of the 1800s, as the new synthetic dye started to gain traction. The fields of cactuses were just left to basically rot away over the next 200 or 300 years, and it's only over the last 20 or 25 years that people have started recultivating them and once again creating cochineal dye, which can be used for a variety of things and is used in some of the clothing you might see in, for example, artisan clothing makers on the island. But it's very much a cottage industry now, where it was once one of the main industries that employed a lot of people, particularly in the north of the island. But make no mistake, cochineal was a really, really important industry on the island in the periods from the 1500s to the mid-1800s. And as I said before, it made a lot of people a lot of money. It created a great deal of employment because of that intensive labour cycle. And it really put Lanzarote on the world map as being able to produce something that was quite hard to find from other parts of the world. And the end of what I look on as the sort of cochineal period in Lanzarote, once it died out, it led to people trying to find other ways to replace the income that they'd previously made from cochineal. Some moved to more normal, more regular farming. Others moved to salt production. And it was in this period, after the mid-1800s, that salt pans were created all over the island, and Lanzarote became a primary exporter of salt, which of course wasn't just used to make food salty, it was used to preserve fish and meat and various other things in the period before refrigeration. We'll talk about salt in another of these short stories sometime in the future. But I hope you've enjoyed that short insight into cochineal and how important it was to Lanzarote. And please remember that we produce a video like this every Tuesday talking about the history or giving stories about Lanzarote, often from the past. Every Thursday we produce a video shot somewhere on the island where we've just been showing you what the island looks like today. And on every Saturday we produce our weekly news, bringing you up to date with everything that's been going on your favourite island. Thank you so much for watching. We really do appreciate every view. If you've liked this video, please give us a like. If you want to see more of them, hit the subscribe button. And if you've got a comment or a question, put it in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I will always try to answer your questions. So from Mike at Lanzarote Information, bye for now.